rising junior at Shippensburg University, where I study software engineering. On behalf of all the interns, we welcome you, and we are very excited to run through this conference with you. Thank you, dear board members, for creating this beautiful opportunity for us. Thank you also, dear parents, for your support, because we wouldn't make it without you. And thank you, dear guests and sponsors, to honor us today with your presence and contributions. And thanks to everybody who is present today. It is a great pleasure because today is also the end term of our 2024 internship program. It's been 2 months of dedication, learning, and excitement. But it's not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of many opportunities for these young ladies and gentlemen to create a positive impact on the society. And I truly believe that we are capable to do so and much more. And today we all gather here to make this conference the most successful one. And we've got a noble theme: can the world be saved? Perspective from the next generation. That's what we're going to discover, ladies and gentlemen. But before, I would like to invite two of my fellow interns, Leah and Ryan, for our icebreakers. Leah and Ryan.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Leah Almer, and I'm a rising junior at Northern Lebanon High School, as well as one of this year's interns. I participated in this internship in order to further explore my interest in journalism and global affairs. Today, we will be starting this conference off with some trivia icebreakers and candy, led by myself and my co-host Ryan.
Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Bakshi, a rising senior at Cumberland Valley High School. As like all my other interns, I'm passionate about world affairs and learning about the world around us. Specifically, I'm interested in environmental sustainability, justice, public health, and emerging technologies such as AI. So without further ado, let's get on to the questions. So we'll read around 10 questions, and we'll read the answers, A through D. Raise your hand when you guys think we read the correct answer. And if you get it right, our fellow interns will give you guys some candy.
Okay, so let's begin. Question number 1. Which country is famous for the running of the bulls during the San Fermin festival? Raise your hand if you think it's A, Italy, B, Mexico, C, Spain, or D, Portugal. And the correct answer would be C, Spain.
All right, our second question from what country is the traditional dish called pierogi? Is it A, Hungary, B, Ukraine, C, Slovakia, or D, Poland? You guys are good. It is D, Poland.
Okay, our next question. The ancient city of Persepolis, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is located in which country? Would it be A, Iraq, B, Turkey, C, Iran, or D, Egypt?
C. My God.
You are correct. It's C, Iran.
All right, the fourth question is, which country is famous for the traditional Maori dance called the haka? Is it A, Fiji, B, Samoa, C, Tonga, or D, New Zealand? It's D, New Zealand.
Presents are coming.
Okay, our next question. Which country is known for its ancient city of Timbuktu, a historical center of trade and learning? Would it be A, Nigeria, B, Mali, C, Senegal, or D, Ghana? The answer would be B, Mali.
I'm marking so far.
All right. So now we're going to move on to more current events. So, which country saw the election of its first female president, Tsai Ing-wen, in 2016 and again in 2020? Raise your hand if you think it's A, South Korea, B, the Philippines, C, Taiwan, or D, Malaysia. It is C, Taiwan.
You guys are too smart. You're running out of stuff to give them.
All right, our next question. Which country became the first in Africa to eliminate the transmission of Ebola virus during the 2014 to 2016 outbreak? Would it be A, Liberia, B, Nigeria, C, Sierra Leone, or D, Guinea? This one was a bit of a curveball. It was B, Nigeria.
Nigeria, yes. Almost right.
All right. So, which country is recognized for its innovative approach to urban transportation, including the development of a new sustainable electric bus system? Do you guys think it's A, Japan, B, Germany, C, Canada, or D, the United Kingdom?
D.
Okay, the red bus might have given it.
Gets another present.
Our next question. Which Pacific Island nation is making headlines for its ambitious projects to protect its marine environment and promote sustainable fisheries? Would it be A, Vanuatu, B, Fiji, C, Samoa,
Samoa.
or D, Tonga?
Yeah.
The answer is actually A, Vanuatu.
Ah. No present.
All right, and for our last question, which South American country achieved international recognition for its successful reintroduction of endangered species into the wild, such as the Andean condor? Is it A, Peru, B, Bolivia, C, Colombia, or D, Ecuador?
I team you are for A.
It's actually C, Colombia.
Oh, well.
All right, well, I
Did
appreciate
anybody
you
get
guys'
that?
participation. Hopefully you guys got to use your international knowledge or learn something new, or at least got a few pieces of candy. And I'd like to introduce our first group of panelists, and with our fellow intern, Hamza.
Cece.
Not Hamza, Cece.
Cece. Thank you guys. Wonderful job.
Hello all, I am not Hamza, I am Cece. Okay, hello, my name is Cece Geigel, and I'm a senior at Central Dauphin Senior High School. I have participated in the World Affairs Council to do exactly this, educate others. It is my pleasure to bring you to our panel on top international issues impacting global peace and survival. Throughout the day, we will explore a range of global challenges that influence peace, stability, and the survival of communities worldwide. Our discussions will underscore the interconnectedness of international events and their local impacts. In this panel, we will delve into critical issues shaping our global landscape, including the deepening divisions of the United States, their consequences for both our allies and adversaries, highlighting the ripple effects of international relations and global stability. We will examine the ongoings in the Middle East, focusing on geopolitical conflicts, humanitarian crises, and their far-reaching implications, as well as climate change and Africa, with a particular focus in Sudan. Our distinguished panelists will bring a wealth of knowledge and experience, offering valuable insights to these issues. Now, let's hand it off to our lovely moderators and panelists, Naomi and Medhi. Thank you for joining us, and let's engage in a critical discussion.
Hello, everyone. My name is Medhi, and I'm a rising sophomore at George Washington University. I'm pursuing a major in international relations and with minors in economics and French. I'm so grateful to be here with the World Affairs Council of Harrisburg, and I'm excited to hear our panelists' unique perspectives on these global issues.
Hello, everyone. My name is Naomi Lamont, and I'm a rising junior at Blair Academy, where I discovered my passion for human rights and international relations. I'm honored to be here today to engage with our esteemed panelists and learn more about these critical global issues.
We have the honor today of introducing our esteemed speakers. And after we finish the introductions, if the speakers could please join us on stage. Our first panelist is Dr. Sarah Neibler. Dr. Neibler is a professor in the Department of Political Science at Dickinson College. Her research and teaching interests are in the area of American politics, specifically focusing on campaigns and elections, political behavior, and public opinion. Her scholarly work has been published in various academic journals, and her research has been featured on NPR's Hidden Brain and The Hill.
Our second panelist is Dr. Medhi Noorbaksh. Dr. Noorbaksh is a professor of international affairs at Harrisburg University. He specializes in several areas, such as international politics and global energy and health, and has published many pieces on politics in the Middle East. He currently serves as the Vice President of the World Affairs Council of Harrisburg.
Our third panelist is Hagir Elsheikh. Ms. Elsheikh is a resilient entrepreneur, registered nurse, and single mother of two. After fleeing political turmoil in Sudan, she has since persevered to become a dynamic force in Pennsylvania, advocating for human rights, women's rights, and victims of violence. Ms. Elsheikh holds a bachelor's degree in science and nursing and is the owner and CEO of Housing Staffing Agency, LLC. She also remains dedicated to her community through volunteering, serving on multiple boards of different local organizations, and focusing on refugee services.
Our fourth and final panelist is Professor John Dernbach. Professor Dernbach is a professor of law at Widener University and an internationally recognized authority on sustainable development, climate change, and environmental law. He has written over 60 articles for law reviews and peer-reviewed journals and has contributed to over 30 books. Professor Dernbach's advocacy has significantly impacted environmental law, for example, as helping the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to reinvigorate the Environmental Rights Amendment in 2 landmark cases.
If our panelists could now join us on the stage. We're going to turn it over to Professor Neibler. As U.S. politics appear to become increasingly partisan and inevitably divided, How can we expect this growing disconnect to impact international relations and the behaviors of other nations on the global stage?
The microphone's on.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So first of all, thank you all for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you and to engage in these important conversations. As our introducer said, my expertise is in American politics, and so certainly the international piece of this, my co-panelists are going to have a lot more to say about that. But I wanted to start our conversation with a little bit of kind of definitions of what we mean when we talk about polarization and how political scientists think about this term. And then we'll think a little bit about some of the causes, a couple of the consequences with a little bit of an eye toward international affairs, and then maybe ever so slightly some solutions, although I admit the literature and the scholarship in that arena is kind of woefully thin. But just to back up, so when we think about polarization, folks often talk about it, we use this word polarization, but people mean different things when they talk about it. And so the two kind of most common things that people tend to mean is one is ideological polarization. And so this is the idea that there are increasing differences between the two main political parties in the United States, the Democrats and Republicans, with respect to issues. So, we imagine there was a time in the past, which I think is probably mostly an imagining, when the parties were very close and they agreed on a lot of things, and then we imagine that they've drifted farther apart over the last couple of generations. So that would be ideological polarization. There's mixed evidence as to the degree to which that's true. There's certainly some evidence to suggest that within Congress, among members of the political elite, that there has been drifting apart, not necessarily equal drifting apart on the Democratic and Republican side. A lot of that tends to be attributed to Republicans as having drifted farther to the right than Democrats have drifted to the left. But the other kind of polarization, and I think the kind of polarization that people often mean when they talk about polarization, is what political scientists call affective polarization. And this is the idea that there's an increasing dislike and distrust of people different than you are, or different than we are politically, right? And so the affective polarization, there is a fair amount of scholarship to suggest that affective polarization has gotten significantly worse over time. There's a lot of Pew Research Center data on this that shows a dramatic rise in the percent of partisans who call the other party things like close-minded, dishonest, immoral, unintelligent, and lazy. So definitions, again, most times I think we're talking about affective polarization, but we certainly want to be careful about the way that we talk about this, be careful with the terms that we use. So I want to talk a little bit about causes. There are tons of explanations out there for why this is a problem. Some of these have to do with the role of elites, right? Elite-driven polarization, elite partisanship, the way that elites campaign, the way they talk to each other, the way they talk about politics. And then there are also other elements such as closed primaries, right? Closed primaries are primaries where only registered partisans, only if you're a registered Democrat can you vote in the Democratic primaries, only if you're a registered Republican can you vote in the Republican primaries. And there's some arguments to be made that those increase polarization because they lead to more extreme candidates getting elected at the primary stage of the election contest, and then that kind of limits the choices that people have in the general election. There are also identity-based reasons, right? Demographic changes, something called geographic sorting, this idea that we kind of live in more homogenous communities than we maybe once did. Our friends are more likely to be homogenous. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about social media here a little bit, right? That gets blamed for a lot of polarization in American politics. Issues like economic inequality, unemployment, those kinds of things also can be responsible for some of the polarization. And then we have some other institutional type things. Certainly media is a part of this, right? The rise in the partisan media, rise in social media, the ability to kind of unplug from politics completely, but then also the ability to sort of curate the information that you're getting and only pay attention to one set of ideas or kind of one perspective. Redistricting is also something that often gets talked about here. The political science scholarship is a little bit bullish on that and attributes less polarization to issues of redistricting and gerrymandering, but we certainly can talk about that going forward if folks are interested. Now I want to get to some consequences. Be mindful of time here. Consequences of polarization, certainly on the domestic front, involve things like demonization. We tend to think of the other side as not only just people who disagree with us on policy, but people who are bad people, who are evil people, who are not looking out for the good of the country. There's also a lot of evidence that polarization has led to declining trust in institutions, in democratic processes, in science, and a lot of that science research came out during the COVID pandemic, right? Congressional gridlock, the inability of Congress to pass legislation is a key consequence of polarization. And then really the two that I think most of the folks in the room here are probably interested in, issues related to foreign policy. So political polarization can undercut unified agreement on foreign policy and harm a nation's international standing, increase divisiveness on foreign affairs, which can strengthen enemies, discourage allies, and destabilize nations. Political scientists point to two primary implications of polarization with regards to foreign policy in the U.S. One, when the U.S. conducts relations abroad and appears divided, allies tend to be less likely to trust its promises. And second, elite opinion has a significant impact on the public's perception and understanding of foreign policy, which is an area of policy that most Americans know a little bit less about than they do about domestic policy. And then the last thing I will say is related to the issue of democratic backsliding, as I know that was one of the topics y'all were interested in. A 2021 study in Public Opinion Quarterly found evidence that polarization contributed to reductions in support for democratic norms. And these are things like the norms become politicized, right? And yeah, we'll leave it there. Freedom House in 2021 also said that political polarization was a cause of democratic backsliding in the US, since polarization undermines the idea of a common national unity and impedes solution to governance problems. So I think I'm about at the end of my time. We'll leave some of the solution conversation for our broader discussion, but thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Professor Neibler, for your insights. Now we're going to move on to our next panelist, Dr. Noorbaksh. What can you tell us about how the current conflict in the Middle East impacts international relations?
I want to take you a little bit back to the history of the conflict in the Middle East and bring you back to the challenges that we are facing at the moment in that part of the world. You know that Theodor Herzl's Zionist Manifesto was published in Europe in 1896, advocating a homeland for the Jewish people, and this was before World War I and of course World War II. 1917, you have the Balfour Declaration that the United Kingdom of course supported it for a Jewish state in Palestine. This is the first time that you hear about a Jewish state in Palestine. 1948 is the founding of Israel, and in that separation of land, in 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were displaced. They were expelled from their homeland. In that Balfour Declaration, the Palestinians were not consulted about how the land is divided, and that has been, of course, the point of controversy during, of course, the years. But there is something else that you don't know about, perhaps, the majority of you, or some of you, I'm sorry, do not know about, the Palestine, and how Palestine, before the declaration of the Balfour Declaration, and especially before the founding of Israel, was populated by the Jewish people. We go back to the United States, and in May 26, 1924, you have Johnson-Reed Act in this country, two Republicans who were xenophobic, had xenophobic fear of the Jews, Catholic in this country. They went, and that was of course on rise from 1880 in the United States. They overall, took that act in the United States, and the number of immigrants to this country from the 2 million Jews that came to this country then decreased to 150,000. And then in 1927, with another amendment that went to the 15,000. And the Jews in Europe, they overall, chose Palestine. At the end of World War I, you had 60,000 Jewish people who were living side by side in Palestine. And after 1927, that amendment, then the Jewish people decided to go to Palestine mostly because their experience in various parts of the world was telling them that Muslims were living peacefully side on side with Jews in the Middle East, in Europe, for example, in Bosnia. If you go to the history of Bosnia, you see that many of the Jews, they immigrated to that, that part of the world. 2 million Jews from 1881 to the World War I, the end of World War I, they came to the United States. And then after that, of course, the rest decided to go to Palestine. And that is the way the Palestine, that land, of course, is populated. We had, of course, many wars. We had the we had 1948. We had, of course, we come to the 1973, the last war between, of course, Israel and the Arab armies in the Middle East, the Yom Kippur, that all of you know about it. Then we have peace negotiation, 1979, is Camp David. You have in the Camp David, the relation between Israel and neighbors to some extent overall for self-determination of the Palestinian was rectified and very much, of course, conferred on. You have 1987, you have the first Intifada against Israel. You have 1993, the Oslo Accord, the first Oslo Accord. 1995, the second Oslo Accord. And in the first and the second Oslo Accord, the emphasis was on the self-government for the Palestinians. And this didn't, happen, the Palestinian in the West Bank, in the Gaza, they were constantly under the authority and the control of course, the Israeli government. Then we come to the, of course, to the October 7th terrorist attack of Hamas, that I believe that was a terrorism against the state of Israel. There is no question about it. From 1973, and I go back to the, this debate and discussion, from 1973, the last war between the Arab countries and Israel, the Israeli right to control of the politics of Israel. Before that, of course, from 1948 through 1973, very much in Israel, you see various parties play a very significant role in the politics of that country. But little by little, from 1973, the political right in Israel, of course, takes control. You have resolutions 242, you have resolution 338, that the base of the treaty between Egypt, peace treaty between Egypt and Israel in 1979 is the resolution 242 in the United Nations, the Jordan in 1994, and the Oslos are, of course, 242 and 338. And very much in all of those resolutions, the discussion and the debate is that Israelis, they have to evacuate the land that they captured after 1967 war. And of course, Israelis did not do. We come to the conclusion for the two-state solution on July 24th this year. We are talking about a month ago. Knesset came to the conclusion that they do not agree and they do not accept and they totally reject a two-state solution for the Palestinians, of course, and Israelis. From 1967 to 1989, you have 131 Security Council resolution, of course, against Israel, and in relation to the conflict in the Middle East. Those resolutions are about, these are the themes of the resolution. Israeli occupation is illegal. Taking land by force is illegal. Ethnic cleansing is illegal. These are the titles. I'm not creating this concept. These are in the United Nations. Human rights violation is illegal. Collective punishment of the Palestinians are illegal. And change of course, local law against the Palestinian is illegal. And separation barriers, we are talking about the wall, that is also illegal. What are the challenges? I didn't want to go through the detail of the conflict during, of course, all of those years. The first important implication of what the conflict is telling us at the moment is that the international law, international norms, international institutions are not really agreed upon by the State of Israel. For many, many years, they were discussing that they don't have an Arab partners in the Palestine to negotiate. But now we come to the conclusion that the Israeli rights from 1973 came to the conclusion that any peace negotiation with the Palestinian is not in the interest of the Israeli right or the conservative to dominate the politics of Israel. And the notion of security in that country became, of course, an issue that the political right in that country always resorted to in order to defy any kind of course, negotiation. The second, of course, issue when we go to international relation, we are talking about Middle East and, of course, the West relationship. Middle East is more than, of course, energy. Middle East is, of course, is a huge market. Middle East is, of course, security. All of you know that 40% of the reserves of the energy is in the Middle East, and at the moment, close to about 25% of the need of the world is coming, of course, from those countries. And definitely, Europeans are much more dependent on the energy from the Middle East, and the United States at the moment, of course, is self-sufficient. But the United States has the obligation to secure that part of the world for the energy need of Europe. And we know, of course, that. And that is the second issue that we have to think about. The third issue, of course, as long as there is no peace in the Middle East, then you have the conflict, of course, in that part of the world. You have the radicalizations of the politics, you have ISIS, you have Iran that is taking advantage of the situation, and you have the proxies. That is, of course, the third thing that we have to think about it, that the peace comes to the Middle East. If we can, of course, if we can solve that problem, and at the moment I do not see any prospect in that sense. Number 4, and that's the last one because I'm out of time too. You know that China at the moment is competing with the United States in different parts of the world, and especially in the Middle East. With a multipolar system at the moment, the Middle Eastern countries learned, including Saudi Arabia, to take advantage of the situation and talk to both, of course, powers and take, what they want. They played, superpower. I'm sorry, not superpowers. The big powers, of course, against each other. And we have to understand, this. And in that, context, the United States very much thinks at the moment, and that is a debate in Washington, that is really Israel an asset for the United States when it comes to that part of the world, or it is not. There is a lot of debate and discussion, but these were, of course, the 4 ramifications internationally. Number 1, of course, the relation and institutions that are very much, of course, disrespected, rejected. Number 2, Middle East and the West. And number 3, of course, as long as the conflict in the Middle East is not resolved, that region of the world is not stabilized. And number 4, overall, the recent competition between the United States and China that we have to think about it, of course, more seriously. Because if the United States does not step up its effort in solving, that problem, then Chinese and the others, can be a mediator. As all of you saw, that when Saudi Arabia wanted to reapproach Iran, they asked the Chinese to mediate. And these are the things, of course, that we have to be concerned about. And these are the ramifications. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for providing your knowledge on such a difficult topic. And next we would like to delve into how the global stage is affected by ongoing wars and conflicts in Africa, with a special focus on Sudan. Ms. Elsheikh, what can you tell us about the importance of stability in Africa and Sudan towards greater global peace?
I'm just going to say, first of all, thank you for being here and your interest in knowing about what's going on outside of Pennsylvania and the U.S. Just to piggyback from what Dr. Medhi was talking about, it is not easy to talk about the conflict and the war in Sudan or Africa, Middle East, Africa, and all that region in this short amount of time. But I'm hoping that whatever you hear from all of us today will inspire you to do your research and go and learn. We hear a lot of information that sometimes it doesn't make sense, and when things don't make sense, do your research. That's all I can say. Sudan in particular, and that region in Africa is important or have a great significance within the location. If we talk about the geographical location, Sudan is located in the northern and the sub-Saharan Africa. The instability in Sudan will definitely affect that region, and like Dr. Medhi said, the wars that happen over there, it is not an isolated incident. We are all interconnected, so whatever affects, whatever happened in Sudan, whatever happened in the countries in that region, or in Palestine, Israel, the Iranian, all of those countries play a major part in the stability in that region or the instability. If we talk about Sudan specifically, Sudan possesses significant mineral resources. Later on, if we have time, I'm going to ask you a question about things that you use in your daily life that is coming from Sudan and from that region. Those resources include gold, for example, chromium, copper, and the gold in particular played a very important part in not just the war, the current war in Sudan, but also in relation to Russia and Ukraine war. Sudan was the main supplier to Russia and allowed them to overcome the economic sanction that was placed not just by the United States, but by the world in general. The main exports include livestock, mainly all the food, the meats that we eat, it normally come from that region. Arabic gum, for example, or gum Arabic, however you say it, that plays part in everything that you use. If you're wearing makeup right now, that's from gum Arabic, look at her face. And food stabilizer, and you can go on that. But in your spare time, look at the minerals and where they come from and what is their use in our daily lives. And that will give you a bigger understanding of why that area is very important. And keeping it stabilized will allow Sudan and that region to grow and become economically stable, which is not for the best interest of many countries in the area. The resources became a key not just for us, but also for the two generals that are fighting now, the militia. If you're aware of the war in Sudan, if not, please do your research as well. Both generals are using the resources, the natural resources that is found in Sudan to fuel the war. And by the neighboring countries' interest in those resources, they are funding either the military by providing weapons or funding the militia by providing cars and men. Gosh, I forgot. Airplanes that flies without a pilot. When I remember it, I'll tell you. Yes, drone. Thank you. Drones. My brain just went blank. So in order for us to understand the stability in Africa and Sudan, we need to look at the economic growth and the trade. So if we keep Africa and Sudan especially stable, then the trade will come easy to us. If you look in Sudan, 80% of the cotton, if you're wearing anything that has cotton, it comes from Sudan. So keeping that area stable, it actually help us and help our economy and the trade. Security and terrorism. Dr. Medhi just mentioned that area. Where you have instability, you have wars, you are inviting terrorist groups to become a major player in the area. I can name not just ISIS, but Al-Shabaab, and you probably heard of many other local groups that become terrorists, and they also affect not just the area, not just Sudan, but cause massive refugees to flee the country, to flee Sudan and flee neighboring countries, which cause increase of refugees going to Europe and refugees coming to Sudan. I'm a refugee as well, but there's so many ways to become a refugee. The illegal way is what I'm talking about right now. To understand why most of the world, especially European Union and several countries are supporting the militia is because Hamiti, who's the leader of the militia currently causing the war in Sudan, is the reason why most of the refugees are either killed in the Sahara Desert or drowned while trying to flee Sudan. There is a treaty that happened between the European Union, and that's not just me saying it, that was created several years ago between Hamiti and the European Union, which they paid him, provided him with weapon so he can strengthen his tie in Sudan. In return, he will prevent refugees from reaching the destination. So that is causing a huge humanitarian crisis, not just in Sudan, but in the neighboring country as well. So migration and refugee flows, the conflict and the economic collapse, and all of those play a huge major of people trying, because naturally you are going to try to find safety. And if this is against the interest of the neighboring country, they're going to work into keeping you inside of that war-torn area. Humanitarian responsibility for all of us and for the human rights organization that are currently working. So Sudan became the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. Just take a minute and think about that. And many of you probably did not hear about this in the news, and you're not going to hear it. But Sudan currently, including the war in Palestine, Sudan is the largest humanitarian crisis. The population is near 45 million. 25 million of the Sudanese people currently in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Over 8 million are displaced inside of the country. Over 3 million are refugees into a neighboring country, so that's increased the refugee and put a lot of pressure on those countries in the region. 17 million of the population of Sudan are children who are lacking education, safety, immunization. There is an increase in human trafficking, especially among women and minors, rape, violence, especially gender-based violence, is one of the biggest issues. So this is not, like I said, isolated incident. Sudan endured war throughout the Sudan history since 1956, when it gained its independence. 11 years of peace out of all those years. The instability, the Darfur genocide, many of you probably heard of the Darfur genocide that led to large refugee in a neighboring country. So if we look at the whole big picture, which you are going to hear, and you heard from Dr. Medhi and Dr. Neibler, that we are all interconnected. So whatever is going to affect that region is going to affect us directly. China plays a big role trying to take over. The US is the #1 in the world, right? So China was competing against that. And here, Russia is also doing the same thing. Sudan, basically the location, it is very important for the safety of the whole region. So our interest in the US and the world in general is to keep that area stable, which we're not doing a good job currently. When we talk about the environmental impact, and I heard one of you is interested in that area of study, conflict lead to environmental degradation, right? Resources, deforestation, pollution, and in a common war-torn region, the environment issue contribute to the climate change that we see right now. So essential sustainable environmental practices that will help us to reserve and conserve our environment and the resources, the natural resources. So supporting diplomatic effort will be a reason for us to stabilize that region, whether that's Sudan or the Middle East in general. Providing humanitarian aid, encouraging prioritization for what is needed there, and in conclusion, just like the whole area, the region, Sudan, Africa, and it's not far from Iran and all of the countries that were mentioned here, to keep it secure, to keep it stable. It's for our best interest, not the opposite. The oil reserve is almost gone. So if you think of Sudan, and especially South Sudan, they still have a large amount of oil reserve and natural. It will give you an idea why several countries are fighting currently. So I don't want to exceed my time. If you have questions, we're here to answer it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your perspective on an increasingly important topic. Finally, with our last panelist, we would like to examine how the effects of climate change factor into global peace. Professor Dernbach, could you please share with us how increasingly volatile weather and other issues caused by climate change impact states' relations?
Thank you. I appreciate the question, but before I answer the question, I just want to give a shout out to Joyce Davis. She is an embarrassing I think probably but for her we wouldn't be here. Since she arrived in central Pennsylvania, things have been different in many, many ways. She enriches what she touches, and it's a privilege to be here. The other thing I would say in response to the question for the program about it's about can the world be saved? I think a fair question, and I joke about this a lot with my friends, is does the world want to be saved? And I think figuring out an answer to that is not a small thing, and bringing together today the kind of folks that you have heard already and that you're going to hear, I think is really pretty special. One last introductory thing I would say is I was at events that were somewhat like this when I was in high school, and to give you a sense of where I come from, I graduated from Eau Claire Memorial High School in Wisconsin in 1971. Okay, and I don't remember anybody at any of these events saying, some of you are going to be future world leaders. Okay, that's pretty good, and you might want to sort of take that in. Don't let your own self-imposed limitations get in the way of that. All right, so The answer to the question is it impacts international relations in a great many ways. And to make sense out of this, you need to understand just a couple basic things about climate change. One is, probably a better name for it is climate disruption. And if you want to get a sense of this summer is probably the coolest summer you're likely to experience in decades. Okay? The trend lines are up. They continue to go up. And if you say, a lot of people in my world, environmental law, say, well, I don't do climate, I do other stuff. You can't wall off climate from everything else you care about. You can't do that. The way climate manifests now, a lot of climate change or climate disruption manifests is hotter summers, hotter days, okay, hotter nights, which create problems with sleep, all right, particularly in places that don't have air conditioning. It manifests with extreme flooding. Some of you may remember a couple of years in Pakistan, some very large fraction of that country's population was flooded, which disrupted the rice crop and all the rest. And extreme drought. All of those things affect people. So one of the things that happens, again in my world, is people often want to wall off climate and environment from everything else they care about because they say, well, but I don't care about that. I care about people issues. Climate, folks, is a people issue. It's not, quote unquote, only an environmental issue. The other thing that people do often, thinking mistakes that I hear a lot, are, well, but in my world, everything is just, is pretty much okay, and I'm going to deal with climate as a standalone issue. Or not. Climate is not a standalone issue. Climate touches every issue you're going to hear about today. Every issue. Okay, and it makes it more complicated. We already live in a world that has an abundance of challenges and threats. If you could just take climate change off the table, all right, you've got a pretty challenging plate already. You put climate change on the table, and it becomes what the Defense Department and the Central Intelligence Agency call a threat multiplier. All right? It takes everything else and it makes it worse. That's how climate change works. And so from an international relations point of view, thinking about climate as a kind of a standalone thing, and I'll just let other people deal with that, that doesn't work anymore. Okay? That doesn't work anymore. When I started getting active on this issue in the 1990s, we didn't really, climate seemed pretty much the way it had always been. Climate is not now the way it has always been. All right, but you can look at the science and talk about it, but and read on it yourself. But let me give you 4 examples of what climate change is doing. Let me just start with civil unrest because you just heard about that. Drought and heat and flooding contribute to uprisings and all sorts of bad things in a lot of bad places, lots of civil unrest. How does it work? It works in like 5 different ways. Competition over land and water. Tribal communities that historically have counted on X many acres or hectares of land to raise their sheep or raise their crops. With extreme heat and drought and flooding, that land no longer gets the job done in terms of raising crops and raising their livestock. All right, so you get more and more competition over land and water. You get problems with food production and hunger because crops wilt, flooding destroys crops, people are hungry. The kinds of food production that they have counted on, or in much of the world is agricultural still, the kind of food production that people have counted on for millennia, generations, they can no longer count on. More and more people are moving, okay, because they can't deal with the heat, they can't deal with the hunger, they can't deal with all the rest. And I wish I could tell you how much experts contribute this to what you just heard about in Sudan, but I would be surprised if there was no relationship. Oh, there you go. It increases poverty and inequality for the reasons that I've just described. Some people who are pretty well off can insulate themselves from the bad effects and buy their way out, and well, food's a problem for these people because they don't have any money, but I don't have that problem. But a lot of people are put in worse and worse condition, all right? And if you want to think about this big picture, like really big picture, the way climate change works, is the countries that are most responsible for the increased greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere are the wealthy countries who will experience the impacts the least. It's the small island developing states, it's the countries in Africa, it's the countries that have the least resources, that have contributed the least, that are the most vulnerable to heat and drought and flooding and the other impacts of climate change. I don't mean just ordinary drought, ordinary heat, or ordinary flooding. I mean, the one thing I should say is records on this, on heat and drought and flooding, are getting broken every single year. And if you say, wow, but I bet there are cases where the weather's going in the other direction, it's cooler and so forth, very, very much fewer of those records are getting broken. That's how it's working. Finally, these have impacts that create security risks for women and girls. There's interesting data that in places that are experiencing these kinds of extreme weather events, women and girls are subject to more abuse. And you can fill in the blank on that, what that means. But there's data on that. So civil unrest in all those different manifestations is one aspect. Okay, growing civil unrest is one way in which climate change is a threat multiplier. There's a second way, and that kind of grows out of the first one to some degree, is what I talked about the first one, that's immigration. So here's how it's working. There are some studies, let's talk about the United States for a minute, think that much of the population of the would-be immigrants, the folks that are from Central America, South America, that some way find their way up to the border, on the southern border, a lot of those folks, the argument goes, and I think there's something to this, are climate refugees. Anybody heard that term before? Climate refugees? Okay, yeah. Good. Because there's more and more of that going on, and however much that contributes, it certainly does contribute. And this is likely to increase in the future. If you want an example of a country, think Bangladesh. A lot of that country is essentially a river delta, and the people there earn their living on land that is maybe a foot or 2 or 3 or 4 above sea level. Okay, when the high tides come in, when there are extreme storms, all that, their livelihood just gets washed away. And if you haven't looked at the population of Bangladesh, okay, it's a big population. There's a lot of people who are going to continue to be on the move there. So immigration and climate refugees is the second issue. The third issue, energy prices and availability. Now, for my entire professional life, and even when I was in college, the U.S. dependence on oil has been a big issue in foreign relations, and it's had domestic impacts. There was a time in the 70s, once or twice now, I'm not remembering well, when a lot of the OPEC countries, who are primarily Middle Eastern countries, just cut off access by the United States to their oil in protest of U.S. policy in Israel. And you have energy efficiency and conservation laws that were adopted by the U.S. in response to that. Because it said, well, we're going to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. So that's an old issue. As we move slowly toward electric cars as we move away from oil, as the world begins to move away from oil, you're going to see some easing of that. And you see in a lot of countries like Saudi Arabia and others a greater reliance on moving towards solar and trying to position themselves for a time after oil. But if you want another example of that, take a look at what happened in Europe after the war in Ukraine began in 2022. And the Russians just said to Europe, well, tough cookies, we don't get our gas anymore. Okay? Now, something like 40% of European gas at that point had come from the Russians. And, you know, when the Russians were behaving well, we all thought that was a good thing. We're going to, you know, the economy, globalization, it's all good. And then this happens, and it's not good. And what the Europeans have done in response is they've had their own issues with high energy prices. Poor people have been really hit hard in a lot of these countries. But you're seeing Europeans respond by pushing really hard, or much harder, on energy conservation, on renewable energy, on alternatives to gas. Okay, so that's another way in which, and this is my larger point, as I hope you're seeing, is climate change is not a standalone issue. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about in just terms of sort of impacts that enter into other areas, international trade. So Germany decided some years ago to go all in on renewable energy, and particularly solar. And it's an interesting example because they're much further north, and you wouldn't think a country like that would do solar well, but they do. But when they decided to do that, guess where they got their solar cells from? China. China scaled up big time in response to German energy policy. And what you've got now is the Chinese are all in on the green economy. Yes, I know they produce a lot of coal. Everybody's in transition. But if you take, and they burn a lot of coal, and I get that. But if you take a look at what's going on in China in terms of electric cars, in terms of production of solar cells, those two things just by themselves, I think batteries might be another example. What you see is they're all in on it. And they have an electric car that you could buy, if it were available in the United States, for $10,000 or $12,000. How's that sound to you? Meanwhile, the lowest priced U.S. electric car for the longest time has been Tesla. Okay? And their cheapest model sells used for $30,000. Okay? So, but you have trade laws. And the trade laws say, okay, that you cannot adopt tariffs that are discriminatory against particular countries. If you're going to have a tariff in your country, you have to apply it uniformly. What is a tariff? It's a charge on imported products. The tariffs historically have been used to protect local industry. Okay. We have had a period now for the last some decades of bringing down the tariffs. Okay, because the economic model that we're working on, the sort of neoliberal, or whatever it is, economic model, liberal economic model that we work on, is bringing down trade barriers is good because it reduces prices for consumers. And it does. There's no question that it works that way. But imagine what happens in the United States if we say, well, we're going to let Chinese cars come in as much as we want, as much as the Chinese will make them. Think about what happens to GM, okay, Ford, and all the U.S. automakers, save Tesla. Tesla's in a different category. But just think about what happens to them. All right. They're pushing toward electric cars right now. But the trade issues with China's really unhappy with us over our position on international trade law because we're being explicitly, shamelessly protective of the big U.S. automakers, again, save Tesla. Okay? So trade, energy policy, prices and availability, immigration, civil unrest. Those are all ways in which, I just touched the tip of this iceberg. So let me just close by saying a couple things about what's happening internationally with climate change negotiations. This is climate change as climate change. In 2015 in Paris, countries of the world agreed to get to net zero or below by the second half of the century. Okay? And they all agreed to do that by creating a process where every 5 years they would submit to the Secretariat of the International Climate Change Convention a proposal that they intended to go with to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And in UN climate change speak, these are nationally determined contributions. I wanted to see, are there any climate geeks in the room? Nationally determined contributions? Have they heard that before? Okay, so.
She's got her hand up.
Oh, right away, all right. So that's basically how it works. And the idea is a kind of a ratchet down every 5 years. That's the plan, that's the program that we're working with. And there's all sorts of people that disparage that process. But here's the interesting thing, okay? We're only like 9 years into that process, and already the projected warming is down from about 4 degrees, maybe Celsius. That's about 8 degrees Fahrenheit, more or less, above pre-industrial levels. We're already down from projecting that at the end of this century, okay, to maybe 2-point-something degrees warmer by the end of this century. That's still a lot, and it's too much, and it's not good. But it's better than it used to be. And what you see all over the world, all right, is with solar prices coming down and wind prices coming down, you see a lot of countries and a lot of U.S. states adopting more aggressive policies to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And you see development, you know, the old line about solar and wind is, well, what happens when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow? You're in a bad place, right? You don't want that. So batteries have filled that gap. And the batteries are getting better, and they've got more storage capacity, and they're lasting longer. So there are solutions on the table. A colleague of mine who used to be on the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission posts this thing on X from time to time on Twitter, and he starts it out with "Good morning" with good news. Okay, you probably have climate, you don't believe this good news, right? It can't be good news. So actually, there's a ton of good news. There's a lot going on, and so more people need to work on this. We need more breakthroughs. We need more folks to be engaged. But as you can see, there's a lot at stake here. And whether, you know, whatever you decide to do, wherever you go, whatever kind of leadership or work you want to engage in, right, this is going to be part of your life.
Thank you, Professor Dernbach, and thank you to all of our panelists for your incredibly insightful presentations. Now we would like to open up the discussion to Q&A. Looks like we have a question over here.
I'd like to...
Oh, we have a microphone coming around.
Thank you. I'd like to get Dr. Noorbaksh's expertise on the Middle East right now. Saudi Arabia, primarily Sunni, and Iran, primarily Shiite, have long had a serious tension among them. But about a year ago, they re-established diplomatic relations and sought to build a strong relationship. But things like the Houthis, for instance, have not helped that relationship. Excuse me. Could you tell me what you think of the future of that relationship and whether it will contribute to any peace in the Middle East?
A professor is asking me that question, and I have to be very careful in answering him the question. One of the issues between Saudi Arabia and Iran in China was the proxies. And Iranians did not respect their own side of the, of course, commitment. And the question that Iran asked Saudis and others was not to establish security relations with the Western countries. And we know that after October 7, and the emphasis that many of the Arab countries put on the issue of security, it is, of course, United States is in the Middle East, more ready, more stable than ever. And you heard about it in the last couple of days. Saudi Arabia and the United States went through a security deal. The United States last year went through a security deal with Bahrain, and they thought that security deal is a model for the Middle East, but Saudis did not agree with it. Saudis wanted the United States treatment like a NATO member. And of course, the United States did not agree, but agreed with three things. The security arrangement with Saudi Arabia, this is the first time in the Middle East at that scale that we are talking about. Number two, Saudi Arabia will have access to sophisticated military hardware from the United States. And thirdly, the United States will build and nuclear energy facility for Saudi Arabia. At the moment, they are not talking about enrichment, they are talking about conversion to get the enriched uranium and bring it to Saudi Arabia and do the conversion. The relation between Iran and Saudi Arabia is frozen at the moment, one more time, because Iran overall, in my understanding, is very much for the domination of the region militarily, and no country in the Middle East at the moment is ready to deal with Iran in that way. October 7 in the Middle East, the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel really changed a lot of things in the Middle East. And that was the contention of the Arab countries, that if one country with proxies can bring Middle East to the edge of a war, then we have to deal, of course, with that, with that country. And this is overall, at the moment is frozen. Unfortunately, it doesn't go to that.
Thank you.
Well, Professor Neibler, can I ask you a question, please? Thank you all so much for your insightful comments. But Professor Neibler, I'm curious, in the United States, the conventional wisdom seems to have been that people vote on pocketbook issues, on sort of the personal economy. We've heard a lot about that. Is that still true? Are there many single issue voters? And where do foreign affairs or foreign policies sort of factor into why people vote?
No, those are great questions. Thank you. I think it's really hard to talk about this right now because the parties are so, people are so sorted into parties, right? And so it's hard, we just know who they're voting for, we don't know why, and these issues, there aren't very many what we call cross-cutting issues anymore, right? The parties pretty quickly kind of capture issues and take opposing stances on issues and kind of absorb them into their own party platforms. So I think, it's when people rank issues as most important to them, they tend to still rank economic issues at the top of that list of most important issues that they're thinking about. But I don't have a way, or we don't have a really great way as social scientists, especially empirically data-focused social scientists, to look and see whether people are being authentic in the reporting of that information. And so I think it's really hard to answer that question. I tend to be somebody who thinks that a lot of the agenda of campaigns and politics tends to come from the top down. So I think as candidates talk about economic issues, as the media talks about economic issues, those tend to be the issues that people focus on. I think there's certainly more focus on foreign policy right now than there has been in recent years, in part because of the conflict in the Middle East, in part because of the conflict in Ukraine. To say nothing of the conflicts in Africa, which, as you noted, right, don't tend to hit the American media as much as they should and as much as they probably deserve, given the gravity of the circumstances there. So I think, it's when I think about this, I think relative, And so I think certainly there's more conversation among the mass public related to foreign policy and foreign affairs right now than there has been, but I still don't think, I think it kind of takes over those pocketbook issues. And then we've left out all of the other kind of culture war issues, right? And those two, they tend to be more divisive. They tend to be things that people have a kind of gut reaction to, and so I think they inflame passions more easily in some ways. I don't mean that necessarily in a good way, right? But inflame passions more than these more kind of technical economic types of issues. So I don't know if that gets at any of the questions, but yeah, those are some of my thoughts. I think we have a question back here too.
Hello, this is for you, Ms. Neibler. Are you familiar with Lee Drutman's Doom Loop, by any chance? Like Lee Drutman, political scientist. Okay. He traced polarization back to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, 1965 Voting Rights Act. Would you agree with that's where everything started to go off the rails? For all the good those acts did, would you say that's where everything kind of started to go a little crazy?
It's so tough to point to one thing, right, as a cause. I certainly think that is a moment, and it is, I think prior to that, in some ways, the U.S. had a little bit more of a three-party system than a two-party system, right? We had the Republican Party, we had the Northern Democrats, and we had the Southern Democrats. And with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, Nixon's campaign in the 70s, right, he notably talked about or Lyndon Johnson rather talked about this, and then Nixon kind of executed the fact that Southern Democrats would slowly, and in some cases more quickly, change to Republicans and convert to Republicans. So I think that is a moment where we certainly see the two parties moving farther apart from each other. I want to say one kind of caveat to all of the doomsday stuff about polarization. There's another interesting kind of avenue or piece of political science scholarship which talks about polarization as having a couple of maybe good things about it, and you don't have to agree, but I think it's important to kind of talk about what they might be. And one is that it does tend to engage people. Because if you think the two parties are the same, and there's no real difference between what happens if Democrats win or what happens if Republicans win, then why participate? And right now, I don't think there are very many people in this room, I don't think there are very many people in the country who think that it doesn't matter who wins or loses, right? People feel really passionately about it. And so with the parties being different from one another, it does tend to activate people, it does tend to engage people, and I think that's a good thing for democracy. The other piece is, there was a political science report in the 50s that kind of lamented the fact that people couldn't distinguish between the parties because it made it more difficult to hold the parties accountable. And so again, the fact that the two parties are very different on all issues, certainly on many issues, does increase the ability for the mass public, for those of us in the electorate, to very clearly see the implications of one party taking power or another, and that increases our ability as voting citizens to be able to hold them accountable for the decisions they make. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
This isn't targeted towards anyone because everyone's kind of talked about China today, but as China is starting to less use slave labor and start relying on it with its multiple multi-billion, multi-million projects, with the Belt and Road Initiative, do you believe that they're spending specifically on the BRI, weakening their economy, will weaken their economy in the short term and be even more politically and economically powerful in the payoff, or do you think it has caused too much of a dent financially to have any substantial beneficial impacts for China?
The Chinese economy is not performing as it was performed in the past. You know the road, the Silk Road project that the Chinese had, it was not really, or it is not. The Chinese are not performing, let's put it this way, not as it was expected. They have many countries. When it comes to the Middle East, there is of course instability. There is of course a lot of problem. And if I want you to look at it, this way. In 2022, the GDP of China was around, $18 trillion. The United States, $24 trillion. When you put the United States and the first tier of the European countries together, I'm talking about EU, it went to $62 trillion. And when you compare China, when people think about China and exaggerate that kind of development, yes, of course, there are tough competitors, there is no question about it. But Chinese depend on the Western market, Western investment and technology. You know that the Chinese president, when he came to the United States, went to California and talked to the technology companies over there. Yes, in some areas, 5G or Generation 5, they are advanced in that area. But overall, the discussion that the Chinese become, the most important, economic power in the world. When you put the Western countries together, the level of innovation in those countries, China cannot really, reach that level. In some areas they are good, but overall, their technology is not first rated, the same as, of course, Western countries. Chinese still, they cannot have an airplane. I'm talking about passenger. Yeah, they have a long way to go. Yes, overall, this is my discussion that no, the exaggeration of the China's power is a really bit misleading in that sense. You have to look at the country. Yes, they have been very successful in lifting half of the population from poverty, and much of it depended on the Western countries and investment overall, in that country. But overall, I do not buy that argument that China's are becoming the first power in the world. All of the indicators shows that is not the case. That is not the case. At least in the near future, I cannot see it. Thank you.
Let me just add a little bit with labor and slavery in the part of the humanitarian part. That is not just in China. We all basically contribute to this by purchasing what we know as maids with sweat and slavery. Three things that I'm going to mention with the relationship between China and Sudan. China plays an important part in that region, and currently they are trying to promote peace for a few reasons. You probably know uranium, right? Anyone knows what the use of uranium? Electricity, but mainly nuclear power, right? So generating nuclear plants, which they're currently doing in Sudan. Sudan is very rich in uranium, so connect the dots. Cobalt, it is a mineral that you all are using in batteries, like you just mentioned, cars, cell phones, chromium. All of those minerals are originated in that region, so the interest in becoming either an ally to Sudan and different countries in Africa will help China to further their economic stability, and that provided them with resources to produce cars and batteries and cell phones and everything that we buy. So those are two things, the humanitarian part and the involvement in the region with the war and all of that. And another part that is not just China and Russia are playing with the human trafficking in Sudan. The cases are not just the humanitarian crisis, but the human trafficking, the slavery. There is actually a market in Darfur that is, you can literally go and buy young male, and you decide what age and all of that. So, yeah.
happy that you mentioned nuclear energy, because my question was going to be related to that, specifically for Professor Dernbach. So ever since 3 Mile Island, around 40 years ago in a place quite close to here, the US has not been utilizing nuclear energy at all. And the public perception of nuclear energy in the US is that they're quite scared when they hear of nuclear energy. But then we see places in the world like China, Japan, France, and Canada all utilizing nuclear energy. So you mentioned some breakthroughs that we need to utilize. So how do you think nuclear energy plays into that picture?
Such a good question. So as a starting point, there's already a lot of electricity being generated by nuclear in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. You just don't hear about it. There's a bunch of, and what nuclear does that is a little different from solar and wind is they provide what's called baseload generation. They operate 24/7, 365, and they generate an awful lot of electricity. And so that's sort of the positive about nuclear. The negative about nuclear is that they're really expensive. There's a nuclear plant in Georgia that just went into operation. It was the first new plant in the U.S. in years and years and years. And I think its price, when all was said and done, after all the cost overruns, was something in the neighborhood of $6 billion with a B. Okay, that's a really big number. And so the issue with nuclear is not is the technology available, but is it cost competitive? That's really the issue. And for people like me who in college were not friendly to nuclear, I'll just say it that way, okay? A lot of us have softened up about nuclear over the years precisely because of the climate issue. Now, the answer that a lot of folks suggest is what's called modular nuclear power plants. They're smaller. They are sort of factory designed. In other words, one of the cost problems with the traditional nuclear power plant is every single one of them was more or less designed separately, built separately, engineered separately. What you can do with modular is you take a page from the nuclear reactors that exist on U.S. submarines, okay, and they're all designed the same way by the same companies, and they're standardized. And that's one way of reducing costs. And so the promise, if you will, of modular nuclear reactors is you build smaller ones so you don't have the enormous upfront costs, and you can be more flexible about siting and all of the rest of that. And that's sort of the promise, if you will, of modular. How that's working out specifically from a market point of view, you'd have to dip into more. All I can tell you is that there's, within the nuclear industry, there's a lot of people that advocate that, but even so, with the falling price of solar, with the falling price of wind, with the falling price of batteries, a lot of the technology deployment that's going on right now is wind solar batteries. And they're actually, you're at a point now where they're cheaper than coal, and they're getting to be cheaper than gas. And as that continues to happen, it's just all bets off for everything else.
Thank you.
We're getting towards the end of our we're getting towards the end of our time here, so if anyone has one last very quick question other than that.
There's a question right here.
First, I want to thank you all for your time today. And my question is kind of a mix of economic and environmental. As Professor Neibler said, Americans love issues involving their pocketbooks. I mean, that's no secret. And where this is going is that the proposals of a Green New Deal have been in the talks for a while. And I'm wondering if we were to educate the American public on the benefits, not environmentally, but economically to them, would you see a more positive response I mean, cheap electric cars, sounds great to me. SMR factories in America, sound great to me. So I'm just curious about your opinions on this.
She just pointed to me, so I think I'm stuck. So the thought on that is think about this on the politics of this. Okay, do you know the states with the most wind right now? Do you know where they are? Anybody know? Are they here? I'll simplify the question. Are they in red states or blue states? They're in red states. You know the number one wind generator in the United States right now? Texas. Texas believes in Oklahoma is another big one. A lot of the Great Plains states as well. Okay. And some of this is how you talk about environment, right? If you talk about environment in terms of money first, if you just say, look, you know, farmers loans, we can put, you know, you lease your land for these wind turbines, you can make a certain kind of royalty every year, okay? And you tell the local utility, you plug into our wind turbines and you can sell cheaper electricity. You don't have to talk about carbon dioxide. Okay? There are ways, there's a book I just picked up by a guy named David Spence. There are ways from Columbia Press, and there are ways you can talk about climate with red state people in ways that don't set them off. Yeah. So there's a lot of research about that. And it's worth looking at if you're interested in, and I can you know, but that's sort of the direction that this goes. And I've seen that from other folks who work the climate issue. It's like, you know, if you have to figure out what arguments you're going to advance, what advantages you're going to describe, and some of you know, you don't have to talk about. You know, if you can look, if I can sell wind in Oklahoma without talking about climate, I'll do it. Yeah. Okay, and so some of this is just a matter of how you, it's a matter of communication and how you communicate. And there's a lot of research that's been done on that. How do you talk to folks who think that you're an idiot if you mention the climate issue? Okay? And so I think you follow that research.
Yeah, and I think I can sort of finish by saying, too, that one of the solutions or proposed or possible solutions to some of the polarization deals with federalism. And federalism is that, you know, as you all know, right, what issues are controlled or determined by federal government or national government, state governments, local governments. And so when we federalize things like human rights, that's not necessarily a good thing. But I think federalizing some of the other economic issues and climate issues might turn out to be good because you can make different arguments to people living in different states in different ways that are more resonant with them, that speak more to the issues that they are facing. It doesn't have to be a sort of one-size-fits-all policy proposal or policy rhetoric that just may not resonate with people, particularly right now when people are a little bit more divided and a bit more polarized.
Just one sentence. Yeah. When you talk about Social Security and Medicare, these are aspects of socialism. But if you talk to the Republicans and use the name socialism, that's no. Because socialism is communism, and communism is bad. But these are the aspects of socialism. There is no system in the world that is purely capitalism, even the United States, yes? And the way you talk to them makes a huge difference. I'm sorry.
I think we're all going to have to say something. Yeah, so, like Dr. Medhi said, it's ingrained in everyone's brain that communism is bad, socialism is bad. So if we can avoid and learn who you're talking to and use exactly what was just mentioned here, try to logic sometime and try to tell people what are they going to benefit from basically using the wind in Texas or in different area without saying that's going to help the global warming or lower this. Or every system we use here is social system. and just, provide it in a different way. But what I wanted to say, when it comes to, just understanding how you talk and how you read, I'll say one thing. Read Project 2025. That's all I have to say about this. We are going to lose a lot when it comes to education, when it comes to social services. You are losing things. So not necessarily telling anyone to choose one party or another, but read before you make a decision. Because what you do on November 5th is going to affect everybody. It's not just going to affect the United States and you personally, but it's going to affect the world in general. Sorry to take up too much of the time.
Thank you again to all of our panelists. And for anyone who didn't get to their question, I'm sure our panelists would love to engage with you during our lunch break, which we are about to enter. We all appreciate you taking the time to share your wealth of knowledge with us. We're now going to take a brief break for lunch. Also feel free to visit our career fair right over there to the right and in the back. And we will resume with our second panel at 1 p.m. Thank you.
Hey, Naomi, why don't you go and present them? The gifts. Just tell them the gifts. Sure. Fair job. Yeah, he should be. Because he's on the second panel, so I'm looking around. Yes, absolutely. I don't see him yet. Yeah. Yes.